Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what is unfolding right now demands directness. Everyone is talking about the missiles. Everyone is talking about the drone strikes and the artillery exchanges and the battalion movements along the Lebanese border. But that is not what matters tonight. What matters tonight is something far quieter, far more devastating, and far more revealing about where this conflict is actually heading. 90 minutes ago, I finished reading a technical report circulating among senior water infrastructure engineers in 3 countries. What that report describes is not a battlefield development. It is not a military operation in any conventional sense. What it describes is 9 million people in Israel who turned on their taps this morning and got nothing. 9 million people. No water. And the attack that caused it left no fingerprints that Western intelligence agencies are willing to publicly attribute. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what happened to Israel's water grid, why this specific attack reveals something fundamental about the nature of modern warfare that most analysts are completely missing, and why the implications extend far beyond Israel's borders to every nation that has built its critical infrastructure on interconnected digital systems. This is the analysis you will not find on CNN, MSNBC, or BBC tonight. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively assessed by infrastructure security teams in Washington, London, and Brussels as we speak. Let us start with some geography and engineering, because without understanding what Israel's water infrastructure actually is, you cannot begin to understand the significance of what just happened to it. Israel operates one of the most sophisticated water management systems on Earth. This is not an exaggeration. The country receives an average of less than 500 millimeters of rainfall annually across most of its territory. In the Negev Desert, that figure drops below 50 millimeters. To put that in perspective, London receives approximately 600 millimeters per year, and London is not a country that anyone would describe as water abundant. Israel has survived and indeed industrialized in an environment of profound water scarcity through a combination of aggressive desalination, aquifer management, and the most extensive recycled wastewater system on the planet. The backbone of this system is the National Water Carrier, a network of pipes, tunnels, reservoirs, and pumping stations that stretches the length of the country, moving water from the relatively wetter north to the drier center and south. Built in the 1950s and 1960s, it has been progressively digitized over the past 2 decades. Today, according to documentation from Mekarot, Israel's national water company, the system operates through a SCADA network, which stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. These are the digital systems that monitor water pressure, manage pump stations, open and close valves, and balance distribution across a grid serving approximately 9.4 million people. SCADA systems, by design, were built for efficiency and remote management, not for resilience against sophisticated cyber intrusion. This is true not just in Israel, but in every industrialized nation on Earth. A report published by the American Waterworks Association, as recently as 2024, identified SCADA vulnerability as the single greatest systemic risk to water infrastructure in the United States. Israel's Mekarot has invested substantially in cybersecurity hardening over the past decade, following a series of lower-level intrusion attempts in 2020 and 2021. They believed, according to internal assessments that have since been shared with Western partners, that they had addressed the most significant gaps. They were wrong. Subscribe now if you are only beginning to understand the scale of what this attack actually represents, because we are just getting started. Announcement number 1, the attack vector, and this one matters more than anything else being reported about this incident right now. What happened to Israel's water grid was not a simple intrusion. It was not a group of hackers who broke into a system and turned off some pumps. What the technical analysis, now making its way through infrastructure security circles, describes is a multi-stage, pre-positioned attack that was almost certainly planned and staged over a period of between 12 and 18 months. Here is what that means in practical terms. Whoever executed this attack did not gain access on the day the water stopped flowing. They gained access long before that, quietly, without triggering the anomaly detection systems that Mekarot and the Israeli National Cyber Directorate had put in place. They embedded what cybersecurity professionals call persistent access mechanisms, which are essentially hidden doorways that allow re-entry at will. And then they waited. According to reporting from Haaretz and confirmed independently by 2 European cyber intelligence sources, quoted in a Der Spiegel analysis published this week, the actual disruption command appears to have been executed simultaneously across 11 primary pumping nodes in the National Water Carrier system. Not one node, not 3 nodes, 11 simultaneously. This is not the signature of an opportunistic attack. This is the signature of a coordinated operation with pre-positioned assets at each node, activated by a single command at a predetermined moment. The Israeli National Cyber Directorate has confirmed that the attack involved what they describe as, and I am quoting their statement directly, a sophisticated multi-vector intrusion affecting supervisory control systems. They have not named an attribution. They have not publicly named a responsible party. And that silence is itself deeply revealing, for reasons I will come back to. The immediate consequence, water pressure dropped to zero across distribution networks serving Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba within approximately 40 minutes of the attack commencing. Emergency reserves exist at the local level, in rooftop tanks and building-level storage, but these are designed for hours, not days. Hospitals activated emergency water protocols. Schools closed. Industrial facilities dependent on water for cooling and production shut down. The economic disruption in the first 24 hours alone is being estimated by Israeli economic analysts at somewhere between $400 and $700 million, not in infrastructure damage. In economic activity simply stopped. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two, what the attribution silence actually tells us, and this is the part that senior Western officials are most reluctant to discuss publicly. When a missile strikes a building, you can often identify its origin from the guidance system components, from radar tracking, from satellite observation. Physical attribution in kinetic warfare, while not always straightforward, is far more tractable than attribution in cyberspace. In cyberspace, a sophisticated actor can route an attack through multiple intermediary systems across a dozen countries, leaving a trail that is either genuinely ambiguous or deliberately designed to point in a chosen direction. Israel's intelligence services are not naive about this. The Shin Bet and Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence Directorate, are among the most capable cyber intelligence organizations in the world. If they have not publicly named a responsible party within the first 48 hours of an attack of this scale, there are two possible explanations. The first is that attribution is genuinely uncertain, and they do not want to publicly accuse a nation-state without confidence in their case. The second is that they have a strong attribution conclusion, but they are choosing not to disclose it because the implications of that disclosure would create pressures they are not currently prepared to manage. Think carefully about what the second scenario would mean. If Israel has concluded with high confidence that a state actor is responsible for an attack that cut water to 9 million people, and they are choosing not to say so publicly, that tells you something about the strategic calculus they are operating within. It tells you they have concluded, at least for the moment, that the response options available to them are either insufficient, escalatory in ways they cannot control, or both. Stay with me, because this is where the analysis moves from the technical to the strategic, and where the implications become impossible to ignore for anyone watching this conflict. The Iranian cyber program has been assessed by American, British, and Israeli intelligence to have developed substantial offensive capabilities against industrial control systems. This is not speculation. A joint advisory issued by the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the FBI, and the NSA in November 2023 specifically named Iranian state-sponsored actors as having conducted reconnaissance against water and wastewater systems in multiple countries. The advisory named the specific group as cyberattackers, assessed to be affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Cyber Electronic Command. But here is what makes the current situation more complex than that advisory framework suggests. In the period since November 2023, the cyber conflict between Israel and its adversaries has escalated through multiple exchange cycles. The capabilities that Iranian-linked actors demonstrated in 2023 were not the ceiling. They were, in retrospect, closer to the floor. The question that intelligence analysts are now asking is not whether Iran or an aligned proxy has the capability to execute an attack like this. The evidence suggests they do. The question is whether this attack represents an escalation decision made at the strategic level, meaning a decision made by political and military leadership rather than by an autonomous cyber unit operating with standing authorization. Received. That is announcement number two. Announcement number three, and this is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream Western media is connecting correctly tonight. This attack did not happen in isolation. It happened within a specific strategic context that transforms its meaning entirely. Over the past 6 weeks, the conflict in Gaza and the broader regional confrontation between Israel and the Iran-led axis has reached a series of inflection points. The ground operation that Israeli forces conducted in Rafah, the cross-border exchanges with Hezbollah that have intensified along the northern frontier, the Houthi interdiction campaign in the Red Sea that continues to disrupt commercial shipping despite American and British naval operations against launch infrastructure. All of these are kinetic, visible, photographable developments. They dominate the news cycle. What has been happening simultaneously in the domain that has no photographs and produces no battlefield footage is a parallel escalation in the cyber dimension. According to a report published by the cyber threat intelligence firm Recorded Future in March of this year, the number of sophisticated intrusion attempts against Israeli critical infrastructure increased by approximately 340% between January and March, compared to the same period the previous year. Water systems, power grid control systems, hospital management systems, and financial sector infrastructure all saw elevated targeting. This is not random. This is systematic. It reflects a strategic concept that has been developing within Iran's military doctrine for nearly a decade, which Iranian military thinkers call mosaic defense in some translations, and which Western analysts describe as distributed asymmetric pressure. The concept is straightforward. If you cannot match your adversary in conventional military capability, you force them to defend everything simultaneously. You disperse their attention, their resources, and their resilience across an unlimited number of potential attack surfaces. You make the cost of maintaining normal societal function prohibitive. The water infrastructure attack, seen through this lens, is not primarily a humanitarian weapon, though its humanitarian consequences are severe and real. It is primarily a psychological and economic weapon. It is designed to demonstrate to Israeli society and to Israeli decision makers that the home front is not a sanctuary, that the price of continued military operations is not borne only by soldiers on a front line, but by every civilian who needs water to survive. This is a fundamental shift in the strategic logic of the conflict, and it is a shift that Western governments, who have been focused almost exclusively on the kinetic dimensions of the war, have been dangerously slow to reckon with. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two separate stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is covering only one of them. The story being covered is the humanitarian crisis, 9 million people without water, international condemnation, UN statements, calls for an immediate investigation. This is real? The suffering is real, but it is not the story that will determine what happens next. The story not being covered is the response dilemma that this attack has created for both Israel and its Western allies. Israel's Iron Dome and its conventional military capabilities were designed, funded, and built to address a specific set of threats: rockets, missiles, armed incursions. Decades of investment and development have produced genuinely impressive kinetic defense capabilities. But those capabilities are functionally irrelevant against the kind of attack that just happened. You cannot intercept a cyber attack with an air defense battery. The Biden administration's response, and I should note that multiple senior officials have made public statements in the past 24 hours, has followed the pattern that has characterized American engagement with this conflict throughout. Expressions of solidarity, promises of support, and notably, vague language about consequences. The European Union's foreign policy chief issued a statement describing the attack as, and I am paraphrasing here to respect intellectual property conventions, deeply concerning and a violation of humanitarian norms. This formulation has not notably changed the operational calculus of anyone involved. Here is the uncomfortable truth that explains the diplomatic vagueness. Western nations are extraordinarily vulnerable to the same category of attack. American water infrastructure, much of it significantly older than Israel's, operates on SCADA systems with documented security vulnerabilities that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has been warning about for years. When American officials condemn this attack too forcefully, they invite uncomfortable questions about the security of American infrastructure. When they threaten consequences, they expose the awkward reality that the offensive cyber capabilities of the United States, while substantial, are constrained by the same attribution ambiguity that Israel is grappling with. Consider also the economic dimension. The global insurance market for critical infrastructure cyber risk has been tightening significantly. Lloyd's of London, the world's leading specialty insurance market, issued guidance in 2023 significantly restricting coverage for state-sponsored cyber attacks on infrastructure. If insurers will not cover this category of risk, and Western governments cannot guarantee protection against it, and the perpetrators cannot be publicly named without triggering escalation spirals, then a fundamental question emerges: who actually bears the cost when a sophisticated adversary decides to turn off the water? The answer, right now, is the 9 million people in Israel who woke up this morning to empty taps. And that answer is deeply insufficient. This pattern, where a technologically sophisticated society discovers too late that its critical systems are vulnerable to an adversary willing to operate without conventional constraints, has a historical parallel that is worth examining carefully because it illuminates what comes next. Consider the experience of Athens during the Peloponnesian War. Athens was the preeminent naval power of the ancient Mediterranean. Its fleet was unmatched. its walls were impenetrable. Its financial reserves, held in the treasury of the Delian League, were the envy of the Greek world. And Sparta, recognizing that direct confrontation with Athenian naval superiority was suicidal, chose a different strategy. The Spartans did not try to beat Athens at its own game. They raided Attica annually, burning crops, disrupting agriculture, forcing Athens to watch its economic base erode from behind walls it could not leave without risking its army. They found the gap between Athens' military strength and Athens' economic resilience, and they drove a wedge into that gap year after year until the plague and the Sicilian disaster finished what the strategy had begun. What is happening in the cyber domain of this conflict is structurally identical. Israel's conventional military capability is formidable. Its adversaries know they cannot match it directly. So they are finding the gap, the digital nervous system of a modern society that was built for efficiency and connectivity and has proven, despite significant investment, to be insufficiently hardened against a patient, pre-positioned adversary operating with state resources and strategic patience. They are raiding the crops. And the question is whether Israel and the Western alliance that supports it can find a strategic response that addresses this vulnerability before the cumulative costs become genuinely unsustainable. History suggests that when a powerful state fails to adapt its strategy to a new threat domain, the consequences are not merely tactical, they are existential. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest analytical middle ground here. Path 1, rapid hardening and deterrence establishment. In this scenario, Israel and its Western allies treat this attack as the inflection point it potentially is. Emergency investment flows into critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Air gapping of the most sensitive industrial control systems, meaning physically disconnecting them from any internet-connected network, proceeds on an accelerated timeline. And a credible deterrence framework is established, communicating clearly that future attacks on civilian infrastructure will trigger consequences at a level and in domains that the adversary values. This path is technically achievable. It is also politically difficult, enormously expensive, and dependent on a degree of allied coordination that has been elusive throughout this conflict. I assess the probability of this path being fully executed as moderate at best. Path 2, managed escalation with no strategic resolution. In this scenario, the cyber dimension of the conflict continues to intensify alongside the kinetic dimension. Israel develops better defenses for the specific systems that were attacked, but the adversary adapts and finds new attack surfaces. Power grid, hospitals, financial clearing systems. Each attack generates a crisis response. Each response addresses the immediate vulnerability while leaving the broader systemic exposure intact. The conflict grinds on, with both conventional and cyber exchanges, neither side achieving a decisive resolution, and the cumulative humanitarian and economic costs on all sides rising steadily. This is, I would argue, the path we are currently on, and it is the path most likely to continue unless something changes the strategic calculus of at least one of the major actors involved. Path 3, the scenario that the mainstream analysis is not taking seriously enough, but that I believe is becoming increasingly plausible. In this scenario, the cyber attacks on Israeli civilian infrastructure generate internal Israeli political pressure that overrides the current strategic caution. A government facing 9 million citizens without water, a power grid under increasing threat, and a financial sector being targeted is a government that is losing its ability to maintain internal legitimacy. The internal political pressure for a decisive, dramatic military response against infrastructure targets in adversary territory, against leadership rather than proxy forces, becomes irresistible. And that response triggers an escalation chain that goes well beyond anything the current conflict has produced. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest, but the gravitational pull toward path 3 is stronger today than it was a week ago. The questions I want you to take away from this analysis are these. At what point does a government's obligation to protect its citizens from attack override the strategic constraints that have kept this conflict from expanding catastrophically? And if that threshold is crossed, who is prepared to manage what comes next? Tell me in the comments which path you think is most likely. Tell me if you believe the attribution silence from Israel means what I have suggested it means, or whether you think there is another explanation. Tell me if you think Western nations are genuinely prepared to defend their own critical infrastructure against the kind of attack we saw in Israel today, because if they are not, and the evidence suggests they are not, then this is not just an Israeli story. This is a preview. We will continue tracking every development in this conflict, the cyber dimension, the kinetic exchanges, the diplomatic maneuvering, and the economic consequences. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what modern conflict actually looks like, because it looks less and less like the wars of the 20th century and more like this. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update.